My sermon passage is from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 19 to 24. The woman at the well said to Jesus, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. The woman at the well is where we left her last week, still at the well. We have more to hear from Jesus in conversation with her, and she has more to say to us. She's sneaky that way. This whole passage is sneaky, and it seems so straightforward. Jesus asks a woman at a well for a drink of water. But last week I talked about how scandalous everything is in this story. Jesus, as a Jewish man, shouldn't be talking to a woman in public who he didn't know, especially a Samaritan woman, because Jews and Samaritans were suspicious of one another over religion and religious practice and culture. They pretty much despised one another. That's why the parable of the Good Samaritan is so striking as an example of what it means to love your neighbor. It's a story of a Samaritan, an enemy of the Jews, setting all that aside to help a Jew. Sneaky. Sneaky. The Jews who first heard Jesus tell that story surely thought he was crazy. And some of them did, in fact, think he was out of his mind. Jesus is being sneaky with a woman at the well, too, and with us. You know, people are always asking Jesus for things, an answer usually, or to explain himself, or for healing, or for a sign. But did you notice here? Jesus asked this woman for something. Jesus asked this woman for a drink of water at Jacob's well, no less, in front of God and everybody, in a public place. That's sneaky Jesus. He threw the woman off by even talking to her, and now he's throwing us off not only by acting outside his own norms, but outside our own expectations of him. He can't be needing anything. He's Jesus. Why is he asking her for something? Because he's sneaking. That's why. He's sneaking in broad open daylight. Maybe sidling is a better word. Sidling is a kind of sneaking. You sidle up to someone and you're in front of them before they realize it, right? When Jesus sidled up to that woman at the well at the 6th hour, at noon, in the light of day, not in the dark, not at night, he startled her. And he startled his disciples. And he should be startling us to get our attention in the light of our own day. Remember what light and darkness mean in the Gospel of John. It's a motif. John says people are caught in spiritual darkness. In John, light is truth, and darkness is blindness and deafness. Remember Nicodemus 2 Sundays ago? He was a known. He was a rabbi. And he came to Jesus at night in the dark, deaf to truth and blind to it. And he left at night, sadly the same way, still in the dark and still blind. He did come around later in John. The woman at the well is an everyday woman. So every day she wasn't even given a name. But she met Jesus in the light. She had ears to hear and eyes to see. And she heard and she saw the truth. And she gladly took the truth and the light with her back to her town, and there are others with open eyes and ears and hearts. They also received it with joy. but it didn't start out so promising. So let's walk up to the edge of darkness and watch how the light dawned on her. The woman and Jesus started out with a big disagreement. We Samaritans, she said, we worship God up here in the north on this mountain, but you Jews, you worship God down south in the temple at Jerusalem. And you'd think that might be a deal killer. And Jesus does get kind of huffy at first. He gets a little snarky. Woman, believe me, he says, and I was laughing with my wife. The only person that can get away with saying, woman, maybe Jesus. Woman, believe me, he says, the hour is coming when neither on your mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. And you might as well have added, so there. But Jesus goes on, crossing another boundary. But the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such the Father seeks to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Church, we need to listen closely and seek wisdom and courage here. Wisdom and courage for getting along with worlds at odds with ours, and for finding our way as believers among others who trust God but worship in different ways and places, or on some other mountain. First, the world. I'm going to read to you some words of wisdom from a former colleague of mine named Kendrick Blackwood. I worked with him years ago when he was a reporter and I was an editor at the same newspaper in Texas. He's a white man. He's from Kansas City, Missouri, and he's been a school teacher for the past few years after stints at different newspapers, and he worked in local government for a while. But since last summer, he's been teaching at the American Academy in Casablanca, Morocco. The other day, he posted this on Facebook after hearing that large electronic devices were being banned on flights to the West out of mostly Muslim countries. My little family and I fly Royal Air Maroc out of Mohammed V Airport a lot. And today I want to fly Royal Air Maroc even more. I have no knowledge of the threats that make carry-on laptops worrisome. I assume they are credible and require a serious response. But I react viscerally to acts that seem like targeting based on race, ethnicity, religion, culture, gender, sexual identity, nationality, body type, and any other identifiable category that can be used to label one person different from another. I react to enforced unfairness. I realize how unfair the world already is. I realize I am American, white, and male. I realize it more now than I used to. I am in a country that makes this status seem like celebrity. It is a status I was given and did not earn. It is unfair to have different rules for the nonstop flight from Casablanca to New York than for the nonstop flight from Paris to New York, or for the nonstop flight from Rio. I was contemplating my experience with security and how it feels, realizing this is not an objective measure. I caught myself thinking Casablanca Airport seems pretty secure, but Paris Airport security does feel more hardcore. But then I thought about flights from other developing countries that don't happen to have population majorities devoted to Islam. I do not believe this particular security worry is present only at these 10 airports, which were named, I guess. I am not an expert on airport security, but I am an expert on people. I know that if I put a student in a corner and tell her she sucks, if I highlight the way she is different than the other students, rather than the way she's the same, if I then grade her essays on a different rubric or make her do her research using fewer tools, she will live down to my expectations. Teachers know this. And my friend concluded, if we expect the Islamic world to hate us and continue to give them reason to, they will. Words of wisdom. I told him, Kendrick, that'll preach. And I will. And so I have. Because his words bear the light of spirit and truth. And Jesus said, do to others as you would have them do to you. Others. That applies to every single other in the world. And I believe that we should take that with us when we interpret and draw conclusions about the policies of this nation as it seeks its scary way in this scary world. And now some more light for finding our way as believers among other believers in our own culture who trust God but worship in different ways, in different places. We all know people who say they have no need for church because they can find God in the sunset, or in the woods, or on the golf course, or by spending, or by, that's a toe right there and I stomped on it. We know people who say they can find God on the golf course, or Sunday morning with a pot of coffee in the Sunday paper, or at the gym, or just sleeping in their own personal Sabbath. Some of those folks are known as spiritual but not religious. Well, here's where Jesus' living water, again, is hard to swallow. It has high irony content. In a passage that's already dripping with irony, it could be that in light of the shape the churches are in, these verses are the most ironic of all. Believe me, the hour is coming, Jesus said, when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. The hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. And I wonder, is the hour coming when people will worship God neither in this church nor another one? The Reverend Lillian Daniel got right up against this a few years ago with a snarky little essay called "Please Stop Boring Me." Listen to Pastor Lillian. On airplanes, I dread the conversation with a person who finds out I'm a minister and wants to use the flight time to explain to me that he is spiritual but not religious. Such a person will always share this as if it's some kind of daring insight unique to him, bold in its rebellion against the religious status quo. Next thing you know, he's telling me that he finds God in the sunsets. These people always find God in the sunsets. And then walks on the beach. Sometimes I think these people never leave the beach or the mountains, what with all the communing with God they do on hilltops and hiking trails. And did I mention the beach at sunset yet? Like people who go to church don't see God in the sunset. Like we're these monastic little hermits who never leave the church building. How lucky we are to have these geniuses inform us that God is in nature. I told you it was snarky. As if we don't hear that in the Psalms and the creation stories and throughout our deep tradition. She goes on, being privately spiritual but not religious just doesn't interest me. There's nothing challenging about having deep thoughts all by oneself. What is interesting is doing this work in community where other people might call you on stuff or, heaven forbid, disagree with you. Ooh. Where life with God gets rich and provocative is when you dig deeply into a tradition that you did not invent all for yourself. Being privately spiritual but not religious has become the norm in American culture and has even made its way into the culture of some of our churches. So while I can't stop people from talking to me on the airplane, can I at least inform them that they're boring? Thank you for sharing, spiritual but not religious sunset person. You are now comfortably in the norm for self-centered American culture, right smack in the bland majority of people who find ancient religions dull but find themselves uniquely fascinating. Can I switch seats now and sit next to someone who has been shaped by a mighty cloud of witnesses instead? Can I spend my time talking to someone brave enough to encounter God in a real human community? Because when this flight gets choppy, that's who I want by my side, holding my hand, saying a prayer, and simply putting up with me, just like we try to do in church. Whew. Snarky. And the Reverend Daniel took quite a bit of heat for that. What a bald defense of creaky, old-fashioned church. And what a daring critique and challenge to Americanized cafeteria-style spirituality. Why, it came across as rude. It was about as rude as Jesus saying to the Samaritan woman at the well, "You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." And we might be tempted to say, as the Reverend Daniel is almost saying, "You spiritual but not religious people, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the church." So there, we might want to add. May we be impolite enough to call American-style hyper-individualism, especially in spiritual matters, just what it is in so many cases. It's selfishness at best, or self-idolatry at worst. Yet, may we also be as ready as Jesus to break through our own boundaries and assumptions in sharing living water, not bottling it up, not hoarding it. We need to share with those we consider our spiritual step-cousins. The spiritual but not religious of our day, like the Samaritans of Jesus' day, are God's children too. And they're responding to something greater than themselves. And I dare say that they're responding to the call of God for whatever reasons without us. No matter how ironic that seems, no matter how hard and bitter that living water might be for us to swallow. Jesus did not wait for the woman to come out of Samaria. He went to Samaria. The Gospel of John says he had to go to Samaria. And we can't wait for the spiritual but not religious to come to us. This is no abstraction. It's no platitude. We have to figure this out. They're not coming to church. May God show us how to sidle up to them in spirit and truth at their wells, for Christ's sake, and their sake and ours. Amen.